Hi, everybody. I am Jen Johnson, and you're watching or listening to Thought by Thought Healing, where I talk about chronic pain and other chronic symptoms because I have my own story of healing from chronic pain. After I discovered the mind-body connection, I was able to reverse a whole myriad of different symptoms. And so I started this channel to really get the hope out there so that those of you with chronic symptoms understand why it is that you can reverse them by understanding that the brain controls our physiology. And so if we target the brain, we target our thoughts and our emotions and our beliefs, then we really can change how the brain is affecting the organs and the cells and just the different functions within our body that can cause chronic symptoms. So today's episode, first of all, I get to talk to Marci Arneson, who has a healing journey similar to mine, actually. And I think you will really enjoy it. There is a lot of fantastic, really great nuggets in how she experienced God, experienced healing in the fear that she carried, amongst other things in her beliefs, and therefore in her body. But also, this episode is going to be a little bit interesting. I actually had a TMS symptom show up in the middle of this interview, actually in the very beginning, and I was going to cut it. You're going to see just some really awkward conversation that I assumed I was going to cut out. And as I'm thinking and praying about it, I think that it is important for one of you to see. I could barely talk, actually, because my throat just closed up, and it was definitely a subconscious fear. As you will see prior to it closing up, you probably won't be able to detect that I went into a protective fear mode, but I did. And I think this is a really great example of why it's so important to understand that our subconscious thoughts, it's not just when we freak out and are in fear or in anger that our physiology changes. It's actually when we repress them. So you're going to see me repress and pretend like I'm okay. And then all of a sudden I can barely talk. And it is definitely TMS, because you will see that within a couple minutes, when I started to calm myself down and remember that I was okay, it went away. And no, I did not have a huge fear response that caused it. It was very subtle, and yet it showed up. So I'm being vulnerable and letting this just air, and hopefully it's encouraging to one of you. So thanks for watching. And yeah, check out my website, thoughtbythoughtehealing.com. And you can also follow me on Instagram and on Facebook. Thanks, you guys. Talk to you later. Bye. Hi, everybody. I am Jen Johnson, and you are watching or listening to Thought by Thought Healing, where I talk about chronic pain, chronic symptoms, and the mind-body connection, which is the hope in why we can heal. And so today I have the honor of interviewing Marci Arneson, who has a story of healing. And as you will learn in this episode, as in others, I come at this from a Christian perspective. And so if that's important to you, then you're definitely in the right place. And so it's partly because of that I'm so excited to hear this healing journey. So Marci, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor and a privilege, and been looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, same here. And we're all honored to hear your story. So yeah, why don't we just start by you just telling us a little bit about yourself, where you are, who you are.
Sure, yeah. Well, I grew up in a pretty traditional family, was one of 8 children, and was right in the middle, number 4. My mom and dad did the best to provide for us. I loved sports growing up through high school and college, just competed and loved competition. Ended up graduating college with an elementary education degree, and also did some work with kinesiology. I just loved how the mind and body work together, even, back in college. And now I'm married. I have 2 adult children, and great family. I really am grateful for my family. They've helped me a lot on this journey as well. And I love nature. Grew up in the Midwest, pretty much have lived here my whole life. And now my husband and I, for the past 30 years, we've been serving in the full-time ministry here in the Chicago area.
Oh, okay. What does that look like, full-time ministry for you?
I do it's changed over the 30 years with different roles we've had, but it's working with men and women throughout, the Chicago area. We do parenting, counseling, and marriage counseling, and just really helping people to understand the Word of God. A lot of teaching people that are interested in just how to become followers of Jesus. So it's really an incredible, I've been very privileged to also have this job. We love it.
Wow, that's really cool. I'm going to put a pin in that and remember, we'll send you some referrals.
Great.
Okay, well, why don't we talk about then basically where and when did you first start experiencing TMS symptoms? Maybe you knew it at the time, maybe you didn't. Just tell us a little bit about that part of your journey.
Sure. The first, I think, intense headache I had, for me, I've been a chronic pain sufferer of migraines. And so my first pain was probably when I was about 16. It wasn't anything that lasted for days, but it was definitely a couple hours of this intense pain. And I just remember it wouldn't go away no matter what I tried to do. And that was kind of, obviously, eventually it did go away, but was like, whoa, that was not fun. And then around 23 to 32 years old, I kind of would have episodic migraines just, every so often. But I didn't know they were migraines. They were just really bad headaches. I didn't actually know really what was going on. And around 32 is when it kind of progressed to, so really the past 20 years progressed to chronic. And we're pretty much then either, well, just, it went from 5 a month to 6 a month to up to 15 a month, just almost every other day. So that's kind of the progress of it for me.
Okay. Did you have, I have like a frog in my throat.
Are you okay?
This is really interesting, and I'm going to cut this out.
Okay. Drink some water. Yeah.
I know, by the way, that this is a TMS symptom.
Okay. That's interesting.
So I know it's because I didn't like my intro. This is fascinating. I've never had this happen. And I felt it come on immediately and was like, oh, okay. Interesting.
Your intro was great, I thought.
Yeah, inner critic.
It was like every other one I've watched so many of your podcasts. I feel like it was like just watching your podcast. I was like,
okay, wow. Jen, you are safe.
You are safe. I am safe. We are safe.
I'm like actually tempted to leave this in.
Yeah, right? Interesting. Yeah. Our bodies are so amazing. They really try to protect us. And that's one of the things I'm learning right now is just kind of sitting with that and being like, okay, I'm okay. Brain, you're okay, And yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But gosh, I was thinking about that too. Just my husband, he speaks publicly often. And so he, the throat gets so much work too. Part of could be a lot of things, but yeah, it can be a lot of wear and tear on our system,
Woo! It's literally, my body is literally protecting me from making a fool out of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I've been super nervous. And so my whole family's been praying for me. So I actually feel like, okay, God, whatever you want us to say, we're going to say. And I just really am like super encouraged that God works through us, even in that when I'm weak, then he shines, through me. And I feel like I've been very weak. So it's like good to be like, okay, God, you've made me strong,
Yeah. Yes, because when I am weak, he is strong. And so
yeah,
that verse has always kind of really made me think a lot about this work because I, through my own healing journey, I often said, I am strong and I'm okay.
Yeah.
And then I would go back and forth in my head of like, wait, can I claim that? Am I strong? Because the Bible says when I am weak, he is strong. And so I had this inner struggle often around this very statement. And so you bring that up just reminds me that even in moments when I do have subconscious fear about my intro and about how I'm perceived, he's still strong and he is still going to be represented. And see.
No, even as I was getting ready this morning, I started to feel some symptoms and I was like, okay, because I've been doing so great, like God is just really helping me. And I was like, whoa, what am I? And I just kind of had a backtrack in my thoughts. Like I was scaring myself, you know what I mean? With my thoughts. I was like, Marci, it's okay. You're safe. It's going to be God. And you can also just know that your brain is, thinks you're in danger, but you're not. Like just having to do all of that was so helpful. And immediately it went away. I was like, oh, okay, good. Because I kind of for a second was like, uh-oh. Yeah. Is this going to be like, here I am talking about how wonderful it is to find this process and then go into some, downward, you know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. I absolutely know what you mean. And it's interesting because every time we start something new and somewhat scary in our lives, we do have to wrestle with that fear. And so I remember I had healed and then I started thought by thought healing and I had the same thing as you of like, oh, especially when it's interviews and you don't have control, right? Like it's not like
totally
stop and start. In the beginning, when I started thought by thought healing, I had the ability to stop and start and present myself in a way that was quote unquote safe. And then switching to interviews, a totally different ballgame. And so I know that there's more quote unquote risk. There's more things to protect in that. So, okay, well, I'm going to pray about whether I'm going to cut this part or not.
Whatever you decide, I trust you.
Yeah. I think I remember you mentioning once too that like maybe did your migraines shift around? Did you have
and
eye maybe or shoulder or something?
You're right. I did mention that, and I know that sometimes I was thinking about sometimes when I hear other people share their symptoms, if I'm not ready to, it can kind of trigger me, Okay. So I hope that but it's also helpful to hear, wow, somebody went through this intense thing and it's what I'm going through and now they're recovering. And so I'm hoping that as I share this, it's helpful to whoever is listening, but I absolutely had. What's that?
I just think what Marci's saying for those of you listening or watching is you're going to share some things that if hearing about people's pain is triggering to you, then maybe skip forward 15 seconds or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Cause I would definitely have, very sharp pain in my head. Often it was usually on the right side, right in my eye, area, almost like, just something was sticking in there, right? Just to the point it was very debilitating and oftentimes very overwhelming. And I remember just being in my room, rocking myself, just crying myself, trying to get out of the pain, and it'd be just waiting for either the medication to kick in or me to fall asleep. And then there was that emotional turmoil that you were dealing with because when you get into that kind of pain, it really wreaks havoc on your whole system. My whole system would just be out for a day. And even after the pain was gone, I felt like God just like, I don't know, just, it was difficult to kind of, then even the next day without the intense pain, kind of, you just felt like you had this reverb, of what your system had been through for the past 24 hours. So, it was pretty debilitating for many years.
Yeah. I definitely feel you on that. And I also love your story because the longevity of your symptoms is, age 16 and dealing with migraines, it's so long, and to have that steal the abundance of life from you for so long, I'm sure had I'm skipping ahead to the healing part of your story, but I'm
Mm.
sure that there what was there mourning for you in
Mhm.
the loss of those years, or was it all just joy that you had finally found this understanding, this answer essentially?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, definitely there was a lot of shame, I think, that I attributed, and guilt that I would feel, not being able to get up in the morning and be with, when my kids were younger,
Yeah.
to really feel like I wanted to be there for them in the mornings. And I was super grateful that my husband would be able to get up with them and help them on the days that I was sick. But yeah, there'd be a lot of shame and guilt kind of tied to it. And yeah, absolutely a loss feeling of like, because it became, as you know, with the chronicness of pain, you're either in the pain, or if you're not in the pain, you're managing when's it going to come again, or you're expecting, or it's like, so even though maybe I wasn't having that symptom, I was all consumed with it, because you're just wanting to prevent it from getting to that place again. And eventually it would. And then you're just kind of, and so it became very, not only the physical pain, but the emotional depression, or just discouragement, I think, was what I really faced a lot of discouragement. And just feeling like, finally I got to a place where, like, okay, I just accept it. This is just my life. This is just going to be my life.
Right.
It stinks, but this is it. And for some reason, at least accepting it helped me to say, okay, I can kind of keep getting through each day. But I didn't have in my head that I always kept searching for an answer, but I just was like, I don't know if it's ever going to go away. I hope, and I would pray, God, take it away. But for whatever reason, I just kept saying, okay, I know that I can heal, but it's just not happening yet. And that's where I was pretty perplexed, with what was going on.
Yeah, and there's a lot of just really important gold nuggets in there. That hypervigilance, the
Yeah.
overprotectiveness, the once we have a symptom, and then just life without even meaning to just revolves around the symptom. And part of the way out is to move from that pattern of always trying to fix yourself to realizing I am okay. There's nothing wrong with me. But
Yeah.
it's such an interesting process to do that. So when you say you kind of you didn't give up, you knew like there's something in here that I know I can heal. Do
Yeah.
you think subconsciously, like, you knew it was brain related, or did you think it was some structural physical abnormality that was causing it?
Well, it's interesting. And for many years, I kind of just suffered in silence, because I was like, I'm just going to
Hmm.
push through, just keep pushing through, get up, do what you got to do. And so, yeah, I felt like, okay, I can get through the days, but and I remember talking to my different neurologists and different doctors, and them saying, okay, we're diagnosing you with migraine, but there's nothing wrong with you. Like, we can't find anything wrong. I mean, got MRIs. I was at the Diamond Headache Clinic and did blood tests and all of this work, and was even on the front of this this magazine for the North Shore University Health System for migraines. Because I was so known kind of with that the neurologist, and they really provided what I guess they knew to do to help me at the moment. And I was grateful to have some relief, from pain, and whether it was, I even did Botox, I did acupuncture, all of these things. And sometimes I was on so many preventative medicines at one point, and so many side effects from that. And so I had all of this going on, and yet everything was coming back saying, you're fine, there's nothing wrong. And so I was like, well, then maybe it's just a chemical reaction going on in my system, or maybe and I started realizing, okay, there is an emotional component going on. So I started, before I got physically well, started kind of working on some emotional things with my subconscious. There was a book recommended to me by a Dr. Alex Lloyd called The Healing Code, that kind of talked about how to kind of pray to heal your subconscious, and so I was like, okay, maybe there's something deeper that's been causing these headaches, but I didn't have any. It was more just me filling in what was my experience, and my experience was, when I'm stressed or when I'm emotionally feeling these things, these migraines come on. And then you'd go to my neurologist and they're like, okay, it's a nerve issue, but they didn't quite know what nerve issue. There's probably just some nerve, and it was perplexing. It was perplexing. So I think, to answer your question, yes, I think deep within myself, I was like, if there's nothing wrong with me, and I'm okay, then how do I heal? Like, if I'm healed, but I'm having this pain, how do I heal the pain? It was very perplexing.
Yeah.
And I remember somebody, go ahead.
Well, if there's nothing wrong with me, how do I fix the thing that's wrong with me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah. And nobody seemed, and so, yeah. Yeah.
And I cut you off. What were you
Oh,
gonna say?
Yeah. So I think about 10 years ago, I was just like, I can get better. I just said, that's it. I've got to figure this out. And I really started doing more looking. There was a woman named Margaret Paul who had it's almost like IFS, like inner family system method, like an inner bonding. It's called a method of looking at different, ways I take care of my inner self. And so I was working on things like that. And I would start to have success, like, oh, wow, there seemed to be less migraines this week. Or, wow, I seem to be just emotionally not as intense when the pain came. So I did start seeing things shift as I went after some of what I believe mind body teaches. I just didn't know what I was doing. I was just kind of going along, but yet the pain kept coming back because I didn't have this final. To me, I look at it as kind of the final piece that I needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So you started finding some relief. Interesting. Before you discovered the mind body connection.
Yeah. I started noticing
some of the tools.
Excuse me?
Through using some of the mind body tools.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's when last October, when I actually came upon the mind body connection, I was just like, this just makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I was able to kind of put into practice right away the things that you were teaching and some of the other people that were teaching mind body, or neuroplasticity. And I remember it was about 6 months ago. Again, I asked God, I was like, God, because I was back to back having migraines again. This was after the summer. We had a really busy summer, and I was like, God, something's got to give. I can't keep going this route. And because I was just kind of having good and bad, and so then I actually, there's a scripture in James that talks about what to do when somebody is sick. And it says to pray for them, as the elders to pray over you and anoint you with oil. And I've never done that, because I just was like, well, that's not really for me. I don't know. I guess I was prideful, or I don't know what the reason was. I just was like, that's not something I should do. And I was like, I'm going to do this, God. I'm going to obey the scripture. So I asked the elders in our church to pray, and they anointed me with oil. It was just a simple, we were actually on the way to dinner, and we were in the parking lot, and they brought, I mentioned it ahead of time. So it was kind of funny. If anybody was watching, they're like, what's happening over there? But they prayed, and my husband was there, and other friends were with me. And it would kind of, I believe God, then that next day is when I actually found mind body information, and came upon a woman talking about pain reprocessing therapy. And that led me eventually to looking things up. And I found your podcast, and for the way you spoke and the way you talked about healing, just so resonated with me. And so I went and watched every one of your podcasts. I got all the information I could. And you were so kind to, have a little bit of time with me, even, to kind of catch up. And you really reassured me. You're like, you're on the right path. Yeah. And that really helped me too, to be like, okay, then I'm going to just keep doing this. And it didn't go, my migraines weren't going away right away. And I know we even mentioned maybe I could one day be on your podcast. I was like, oh, I would be honored to be on your podcast, but I just don't feel like I'm there yet. And so the fact that I'm here now is so just really continues to reiterate the hope that I have, in this process. And honestly, so grateful for, even how you attribute healing to what God has already designed. And I love the God piece with the science piece. To me, that's fascinating. So
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Did I go off? I'm sorry if I did.
No, not at all. And actually, just you sharing about the anointing with oil, the times that you and I have talked, we haven't connected over this. So I have a similar story, is that I had just like endured and nothing was changing. And finally one day I was like, I don't know, I've never asked my pastor to pray for me. Yeah, again, like this is not for me. And so I finally did it, and I had them anoint me with oil, and they talked to me about how it was not magic, and the oil wasn't going to heal me. And then they asked me a question about like sin. Do you have any sin in your life that you need to repent of first? And my answer was no, but I have shame. And I don't know where the shame, like I don't think I have sin, but I have shame.
Sure.
And my pastor ended up praying for emotional healing for me instead of physical healing. And then that week I discovered the mind-body connection.
Whoa.
To you. And
Wow.
so I see that as God coming through, and not, he didn't heal my body, but he said, here's the science. Let's heal your fear. Let's heal your shame. Fear and shame are my primary emotions that rid it all. So so I just appreciate you bringing that up. I think that's interesting to have that parallel.
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. No, I agree. I know God is, and I think along those lines, I definitely felt shame, and I also was like, am I just not faithful? Because when I read how God is, he's a healer, I believed he does not want me to be in pain. I don't think he wants us to suffer. We do live in a broken world, so there's suffering, but I don't think that he intends for us to just be, sick and ill. And I think he does want us to live full, healthy, good lives. I mean, eventually we all will pass away, but it doesn't mean that right now we can't be, vibrant and well. And I really believed that. And yet I was like, God, what am I missing? And I think of the bleeding woman who for 12 years just suffered, and yet she just reached out and let go of her shame, let go of what anybody else thought, and just allow God to heal her. And that's where I finally feel like, God just took me. I had to just, because like I said, I used to not really talk about it. And then it started to become my identity. Anytime I saw somebody like, hey, how's your migraines? How are you doing? And then I was kind of like, I was grateful for the compassion, but I also was like, I don't want my identity to be Marci's she just has migraine. Yeah. And then I loved learning about mind body syndrome. And that fact is they really encourage you not to actually talk about your pain, and that you don't have to. And I remember reading something that said, you don't have to explain the way you heal to others. And for whatever reason, that just took some pressure off of me. Like because then I thought, well, I'm getting better. I got to, and I was like, no, I don't need to do that. I think I put so much pressure on myself to try to be well. And then I put pressure on myself to try to prove I was going to get well. I don't know. I just had to kind of let that piece go, and just trust that I could get well. And then by my living that way, and me shifting, and now I don't talk about my migraines that much. I mean, people will still ask, and I'm like, oh, I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. And then move on, and then, so I was like, is it me that's changed, or is it, other people's perception? But I think I'm shifting the way I even view myself,
Yes. I don't know about, well, I'll just ask you, did you find it when you realized, okay, I need to stop talking about my pain? Did you find that to be scary or relieving or both?
Well, it so consumed me, for so much of my life that I was like, if I really stop thinking about and stop ruminating and stop hypervigilantly, is that the word? Being hypervigilant about what will I have to think about? Like it so was such a part of how I lived. And so, yeah, I think it was a little scary at first. Like
Mm.
it almost became my way of coping with it, And so letting go of that, even though it's what I wanted to do, was a bit scary because it's what I knew. But now that I've let that go and trust the process of that, because I remember I was not feeling well several months back, and I stayed home from church, and I called my husband, or I texted him as he was on his way to church, and I was like, "Hey, I'm in pretty bad pain." I said, "But I'm not afraid." And I remember literally just saying, "I'm not afraid," and I wasn't. And I sat with the pain, and I thought, I don't know what's going to happen. Typically, I would have gone and just got my prescription medicine and let it kick in and try to go through the day. But I was like, no, I'm going to sit here and try to do this like a somatic track. And we haven't mentioned that, but just process like, okay, what am I feeling? Where's it at? What's my body telling me right now? And I'd never done it before. So I'm like, is this going to work? And I just sat there, and it was really bad pain. And I just sat there with it, not in fear, but just with curiosity. And it moved. It went away. And then I was like, there's something like, it was the first time I was like, I'm like getting chills thinking about it, because I was just like, oh my gosh, there's something to this. And I'm like, it went away without any medicine, without anything. I couldn't believe it. And eventually it did come back. So I did have to kind of, manage the rest of it, but it wasn't terrible. And that was the first moment that I was like, okay, I've got it. I was like, good job, brain. I was like, you did something, you shifted something, and I just kind of literally physically pictured a new pathway starting in my brain.
Love it.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. Do you remember where did you hear? Did you listen to a somatic tracking exercise, or did you just hear people talking about it? How did you learn to use somatic tracking is basically what I'm asking. Was it through
Yeah.
Alan Gordon or others?
I think you had mentioned it in one of your podcasts, and I think then I looked up and saw Alan Gordon doing a somatic tracking with somebody with back pain on YouTube.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, and I just kept watching it over and over, thinking of the questions he was asking. How did she do it? How did she handle it? So then that's kind of what I did. I kind of put that into practice, because I didn't really have any books yet. Now I've gone and gotten, Howard Schubiner's books, and I've gotten, I've done so much more getting more understanding, but then I just kind of took what I knew and tried to put that into practice, Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It sounds like we have similar healing journeys, but I found that the more that I stopped and like paid attention to what people were doing, like what was really happening with somatic tracking, and taking notes and paying attention to what's happening in my brain. When I started to take the time to understand what was really taking place in the brain, that's when I started to find relief, instead of just like spoon feeding people telling me things and being like, wait, why does this help? What is happening here?
Yeah.
What does that say about how I am living? And it just showed me like somatic tracking was not something I used in my healing journey. I was unaware of it until I had almost healed. And so, but I see the way that I talk to my pain as a similar, basically the same thing in the brain. It's just like looking at my symptoms in a way with compassion and like curiosity and like like you were saying, like, what do you need right now? What's happening around me that's so scary that I need to claim truth about either God or about who I am in Christ, and like put on that safety lens of perceiving these sensations in my body. And so, so just, I think I'm just putting that as a plug out there for the listeners. Like, think about like when you're using these tools or hear about them, what's actually taking place in your brain so that you can start applying it in other ways in life.
Yeah, the education was huge for me. And when you would speak in your podcast, and I remember you even sent me some positive statements, for whatever reason, because I'm a pretty critical person and within my internal critic, if you will, and judging myself. And I didn't realize how much I lived in that space in my own head. And so I would hear you say positive things, and it really resonated and calmed my brain, I was finding. And I actually remember one time I was in so much pain. I was in the bathroom floor, just, kind of rocking. And my husband came in, this was a couple years ago, and he just held me, and I was so discouraged. And he just held me and he said, Marci, he said, this is just one moment. He goes, you're going to get through it and you're strong. And him saying those words to me, I couldn't find those words within myself, but coming from outside to me, that compassion helped me so much. And I know that's a huge piece of healing, is being able to be, like you just said, being kind to myself and to my own brain and having compassion. And so I did have to take on, like what you're saying, like learn how to speak that way and really believe it to myself, not just like say a positive statement, but do I really believe that? Yeah. And that really helped shift. What I loved was looking at the science behind what happens when that kind of compassion is shown to my brain. And I think Dr. Howard Schubiner shares a lot about that. And I believe Dr. Hanscom said something like that hope and optimism, they're finding, they have studies where the brain is healing with it. Yeah. So again, just seeing, the hope of God, the hope in our brain, like all of that it sets us up to heal. Yeah. And I just was fighting. I think my fear, my shame, my negative thoughts, living in a place that I didn't realize I had gotten into a place of just protection. So everything was protection mode, if that is the way of saying it.
Yeah.
Shifting that really is where, like you were just saying, helped me to see my brain start to heal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Fear is so interesting, because by living in protection mode, we think that that's how we resolve fear. Right. So,
yeah.
But in reality, we haven't. We've just settled into fear mode by protecting ourselves, and that's it's still subconsciously living in fear. So until we begin to face those fears.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked briefly about, fear was definitely being a big part of, I don't know. I had heard growing up, and I had heard you read in the scriptures, do not be afraid. Yeah. And you hear, don't, and for whatever reason, I looked at that as, okay, I'm not going to let fear stop me. I'm going to push through fear. Like fear is not going to win. But what I was doing was doing it still through and in and around fear. And so I was almost continuing to, deepen that pathway of fear by pushing through it. And then I realized, wait, it's not doing it in the midst of fear, it's doing it without fear.
Yeah.
And I had to sit there and say, what does that feel like to not be afraid? Because so many times Jesus is like, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. And I think, I've heard, and you maybe have heard too, like, fear is not, I don't remember how it goes, but it's being courage. Courage is like going, it's not having fear, it's doing it through fear. Even the world was even saying that this was how to handle fear, if that makes sense. Right. Yes. But yeah. So I just remember thinking, can I do something with and just saying, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm just not going to be afraid. I'm going to do this without fear. And really shifting it is bringing that calming that my brain needed, and to allow my brain to be like, oh, she's not afraid. Look, she's okay. She's doing this, and doing it not in fear. And so we can all just be okay. We don't need to have pain.
I almost just want to rewind this video and listen to this part again, because I think this is so profound. I've never heard anybody explain it so well. It is not about facing our fears. It is about learning how to do the thing without fear. And in our culture, we talk about, I can do hard things, is a phrase we use or hear or see commonly. And it's not about doing the hard things. It's about changing how you do the hard things, with peace that passes understanding. And like we were talking about, when I am weak, he is strong, and being safe in that space. And and I just love it. I love what you're saying there so much. It's so true.
Yeah. And I know that with Christ, I can live that way, but it's something I have to intentionally, because it's so in me. And I think it's from when I was, all of our life, we're just taught to be careful, don't. So you're just taught, I don't know, that just became a default for me. I'm just, but I always push through, like, and so, just saying, no, it's, of course I want to be careful. We don't want to put ourselves in, in danger, but I don't have to live in danger. So I started asking, I was like, God, only let me fear what I need to fear. If I don't need to fear it, don't let me, make it really clear. Otherwise, I'm just not going to live in that place.
Yeah.
So it has been an intentional shift. And I remember hearing that it's what fuels pain. Fear is what fuels pain. I was like, wait a minute.
I've got plenty
I'm
of that.
only fueling my pain,
Yeah.
So.
And I think for me, cognitively saying I don't have to fear, was not helpful. And everybody's brain is wired differently. So for some people listening, maybe that is a way to get to your subconscious, truest emotions. But I almost had to start with my body and say, okay, if my goal is to not fear, what does my body feel like when I am not in fear? So when I would go to do the thing, I would put my body in that place of peace that passes understanding, or whatever God was showing me, letting my body reflect it first. And then maybe, yes, reciting the scripture, the statement, I am strong, or whatever it is. But I had to start with my body, because my nervous system was just so racked that it didn't want to fall in line with whatever I cognitively claimed. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the mind-body connection, right? It doesn't matter where you start. It's the same. The brain is in your body. It is the same unit. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I think that's profound. Okay. So it sounds like you are saying somatic tracking was a significant tool for you in the healing. What else did you find? Like, after you discovered the mind-body connection, you start down this journey. Let's just say, you're picking 3 of your favorite tools. What were they? Somatic tracking.
Yeah. Definitely, the expressive writing tool, just taking time to, and I'm a big, like, process. I like to process things out. I like to talk it out loud, and I'll just be like, here's what I'm feeling. Here's what's going on. And I wasn't big at saying, let me just write it all down, but I remember hearing about the expressive writing, just write it all out, write whatever's on your mind, write it out, and then just tear it up. And I was like, okay, let me try that. And so I just kind of, without being in control of what was coming out, I just started writing everything. And I did that for a couple of months and would just tear it up afterwards and throw it away. And so it just really helped to kind of get things out that I didn't even know was inside of my mind or myself, and say things that maybe sometimes I would feel like, you shouldn't say this or think this, like, that's not appropriate to feel and think. And the expressive writing just kind of helped me to be like, no, I'm going to get it all out, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and not try to keep it all, like, and so, yeah, just expressing myself through writing. I think the somatic tracking, deep breaths was really helpful. I think just even focusing on, like, taking a deep breath and sending even the oxygen to that part of my system that maybe kind of visualize, like, because I would get pain in my shoulder sometimes, it would then move up to, my head. And so I would kind of know this is a beginning place for that symptom to kind of get bad. And so I would send it there and just kind of calm that area, which maybe is a bit of somatic, is that somatic tracking or is that just breath work?
There's probably elements of it in there, but
Yeah,
eh,
maybe. Yeah. So I don't know if that's an actual, but that's something that helped me. And
yeah.
somebody mentioned once to not focus on the symptom area, but focus where something's feeling well. I don't know if that was you sharing, just like, I'm going to focus on like the part of my body that feels well right now. Because most of my body wasn't feeling the pain. It was always one area that it took all my focus. So I was like, well, my hand feels really good. Or my arm feels really good. I'm just going to, I tried to use that tool to kind of like shift my brain to focus on what feeling good feels like right now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I don't know if that's a tool, but it's something I did.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely heard people talk about that. I had all over pain, so
Okay.
that part or that tool wasn't as effective for me.
Okay.
But I've definitely heard people say that was effective and helpful. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It just kind of shifted my focus a little bit. But yeah, but this somatic tracking, expressive writing, and I think, deep breaths were, yeah, 3 tools that I think were really helpful.
When you look back, do you see like a perfect storm of what brought the bulk of your symptoms on? Do you know what was behind it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I've definitely had a lot of intense, stressful things happen through my life. And I've never necessarily correlated that all of a sudden this intense, stressful thing happened. Now I'm in pain. To me, although those things happened, it was more, I feel like it was this gradual way of me processing danger in everyday life through family situations or my work situations or just life in general. I think it just ended up becoming, so to me, that the daily pressure and stress I ended up putting on myself became kind of a way of, became chronic in itself, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so it wasn't like but I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe there was some big thing that happened that started it all, because there were definitely a lot of, whether it's deaths or cancer diagnoses or, just intense things that happened to my family, that we all experience as intense things. But, a lot of people experience intense things, but don't have migraines. So I was like, but so what is it for me? If that makes sense. But yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because we know because of the ACEs study that trauma brings on
Yeah.
more probability of chronic symptoms. But sometimes people don't have trauma, and it is the daily pressure of that you're talking about that sometimes we put on us, other people haven't even put on us. And
Yeah.
that pressure can be incredibly intense. Like, I mean, think about living under the type of pressure that we put on ourselves all the time. That's chronic, so that makes sense.
Yeah. And I had learned definitely growing up, to be very aware of when other people were angry or when they weren't doing well. And so I became kind of a person that felt the need to fix that situation, or I was responsible for that situation, or if somebody's not happy, what can I do to make sure that we fix that or that we're happy? Because not and I think as a kid it wasn't so much because I wanted others to be happy. I was like, if they're not happy, it's going to affect me. And so it was kind of this selfish way of living as a kid. And I remember reading, Jen, that the part of the brain that causes physical pain, gosh, how did it say it? Responds, the part of the brain that causes pain causes physical pain and emotional pain at the same place in your brain. I can't remember. I'm not saying that right, but
I think that when we experience physical pain versus when we experience emotional pain, the same part of the brain lights up.
thank you. That's right. Yes, that's what I remember reading, and I was like, wait. And so I think for me that was kind of a light going on. That's like, okay, because when I was a kid, I didn't have migraines, but I think I was developing these ways of emotionally handling things that eventually became the pain, the physical pain.
Yeah.
That I ended up suffering with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That empath, that caring that other people are emotionally well is also, it's just a huge burden that to keep everybody else around us happy. I mean, that's trying to control things that we can't control. And yeah, and if we don't feel comfortable when other people are unhappy, then we're living in dis-ease simply by how other people are operating. And that dis-ease can also activate that same part of the brain that you were just
Yes, yes, that's a great way of saying what I'm trying to express. Thank you.
yeah, thanks for bringing it up because it matters. And I was just listening to a podcast the other day, the place we find ourselves, and he was talking about as in childhood how sometimes, or adulthood, we make these commitments of things like that we're kind of aware of, but maybe not, and they can be things like I'm going to make sure everybody around me is happy, or I'm never going to get hurt again, or things like that. And then we just take this huge burden. He takes a Christian like perspective that it might be a commitment that we're making to a lie that Satan's telling us. Like, it is your job to make sure that everybody is happy. And you're like, I will do that for the rest of my life.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
And then we live under that burden forever.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty interesting to look at.
That is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you can get praised for that. I remember feeling like, oh, wow, you're doing such a great job because you're taking care of all these things. And we should care for people, of course, and take care of, but I shouldn't feel responsible. So I had to kind of figure that out, like, and just being okay. And just like you said, I think there was a lot of control I was trying to have, and just to let go of that and just trust people, I mean, to take care of themselves,
And I think this is a really interesting subject to bring up and think about and talk about with people, because it is important to encourage one another, right? So if we see somebody who's being loving, and yet that person takes it as, okay, now this is my responsibility. Like, wow, you're so loving to your sick mom. You're such a good caretaker for your mom, and then you take that on as, well, now for the rest of my life, I want to feel like I am good at this, and so I'm going to do this, and all of a sudden you've carried this burden. Like, how do we encourage and love people without having to take it on as that this is your label that you need to fulfill for the rest of your life?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, that's a really good thing to think about.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. It's 10:38. I just want to get maybe, how are you doing with time?
Good. I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. What haven't I asked you that I think is important? I love to talk about personality traits. What do you did you find that analyzing that or looking at your personality traits, was that helpful for you in the healing journey?
Yeah, it was. You had mentioned in one of your podcasts the fawn response.
Yeah.
And I had never heard of that. Would you say that's a personality trait, the fawn response? Could it be? I don't know.
This will go there. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know, but for whatever reason, because the fawn response, how you explained it, again, it was like this light went on, like, that's what I do. It's kind of what we were just talking about. If somebody's not happy or they're upset, I'm going to go towards that and try to help that, versus there are definitely times where I fight or flee or free. I mean, all of those can kind of happen, but for whatever reason, the fawn response of going towards the, I'll say in this case, it's not an enemy, but going towards the situation that's not, good, is something I saw myself doing. And it just made a lot of sense to me. If someone's angry, I don't know, for whatever reason, I felt like I need to go into that, I'm going to go in. And I think it was me trying to control that. Right. And so, but of course my system was like, danger, 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 and so being able to kind of just identify that and I think, I don't know if it's a personality trait, but just, I can often feel like that I'm doing something wrong, like I'm not doing the right thing. And so maybe that could be perfectionism or something. I don't know which one that would come under, but, I definitely think those things lend to me having putting this pressure on myself and moving into situations that weren't actually safe for me. So to identify that and say, you don't need to be that way, you don't need to do that, it's, take that pressure off yourself, has been really helpful. I heard that, like, I don't know if this is accurate, but like 95% of what I do or what we do throughout the day can come from our subconscious, that we just respond from our subconscious. And I remember thinking, if it's so strong, how do I ever overcome if it's not leading me in the right place? Yeah. And so then I remember I asked a question on a live Facebook feed with Dan Ratner, and he mentioned that if you can go after your conscious mind, it will then eventually affect the subconscious. And that just, again, gave me a lot of power. Like, okay, I'm just not like my personality trait or the things that are kind of my default. They don't have to lead me towards danger. Like I can have power to overcome this and go towards safety internally. So those are some of the personality things that, I kind of looked into.
Love it. Yeah, those are good ones too. The fawn response I find in so many of us with chronic pain. Yeah.
Do you? Interesting.
Yeah, because it feels like love. Fawn response feels like you are loving people.
Okay.
It feels like you are doing the right thing. To unpack it simply, I see it as fight is you fight the lion. Let's say you fight the lion. The flight is you run from the lion. The freeze is that you curl up in a ball and you hope it doesn't see you. And the fawn is you try to become friends with the lion.
Yeah.
You move in and you think, wow, I'm being so kind. Here's some candy. Be happy. And that's, we think that it's love, but it's fear. And then we're living in relationship with the bear. And sometimes we have no choice. Like if you're in a childhood experience and the bear is in your home, your only choice is to bring candy. And there should be all the grace in the world for that younger you that lived in a fawn response. But at some point in time, we're not living with the bear anymore. And we're still doing it to all the bears out in the world. Or we realize, hey, you can leave my house, if you're bear. But yeah, so there's just this facade that it's the good, loving Christian thing to do. In reality, it's just putting yourself in.
That's so good. Oh, that's so good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, wrapping this up, because I actually have a client in 15 minutes.
Nice.
What, if you, just in closing, what would you, what would you want to share with people who are just starting their journey? What would you want to make sure that they know?
Oh, gosh. Well, I just know everybody's so different, and to not try to compare ourselves to one another, I think was a really important piece for me, but to find our own journey, our own path. And I think for me too, just to remind ourselves to be patient with ourselves. It takes time, but it is the right thing. If in fact we know we have mind-body syndrome, it will heal, and to keep being patient each step of the way. And I know for me, I wanted it to, okay, good, it's gonna be done in a week, and it is, it took a lot of time for me to get here. It doesn't have to take that long to get out, but just to be patient, and just to not compare, ourselves, but to stay on what's best for us. I think also the last thing I would probably say is just to keep learning, because, sometimes I'm like, oh, I get it now. But yet then the next day I find something new that I'm like, oh, that's different than what I thought I understood. And so, even for migraines, I remember hearing that the pain was the brain was making the pain. So I was like, oh, that means my brain is injured. That's
Right.
why I have pain in my head.
Right.
And then somebody said, no, your brain, your head's fine. It's just, that's where the pain gets made. And for whatever reason, just hearing that, I was like, oh, I don't have, my brain isn't injured. My head is fine. So I guess I say that to say it was me continuing to learn that helped even put the pieces together. So I think that's such a beautiful thing that we can keep growing and learning, even when we feel like we found some good solid answers.
I love that.
Yeah.
I remember,
So
I've shared this before, but I remember maybe 3 or 4 weeks into my healing journey, just turning to my sister and saying, this is way harder than I thought it was going to be.
yeah.
Once I realized pain is ultimately a fight or flight nervous system response, I was like, well, I can turn that off. All right, I got this. And it turns out it's hard to unlearn, 40 years of all these neural pathways. So yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Marci, thank
Yeah.
you so much for taking the time to share your
Oh,
journey.
thank you.
What
I'm
do you
so grateful.
see? One more question, just this is a leading question. Where do you see yourself going from here? As you're coming out of the healing journey, where do you want to go?
Oh, wow. Well, the thing I think about is I'm just going to keep doing it every day, the healing. Like it's something I'm going to have to keep doing for the rest of my life is how I look at it. But doing it, and enjoying it. And you so inspired me. I remember for when you mentioned, you're like, I'm a chronic pain coach. I'm like, that's a thing, like a chronic pain coach. So I'm actually just really looking into some training. I'm going to take some training and would love to be a chronic pain coach, down the road. So yeah, that's part of where I feel like I'm headed to. So, but you've definitely inspired me in your path. So I really appreciate you.
Well, and I just love the idea that you already have a platform in ministry. And so you just being able to incorporate this could help so many Christians and not.
Yeah.
Since your audience, your platform in ministry is already Christians, that would be such a gift to people.
I'm already seeing it have an impact in the way I'm kind of able to look at my own healing and then able to help others. So you're right. It's already having an impact. So I'm really grateful.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for watching. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you in our next Saturday. All right. Bye.
Bye.